So Garbha Gita is going to be the session or the sadhana or the yatra we will all undertake over the next 3 days, starting today. And I would like to mention a couple of things before I start. This is a fairly packed engagement because we've got just 3 days. And I would like to make sure that I cover a range of things. Uh, some of them from the perspective of what we all know, which is kind of given or taken for granted that we all know. Some of them might be facets which we do not know of at this point of time, but we could probably be vaguely aware of them, getting to define, redefine some of them. And there could be certain facets which are coming to our awareness for the very first time. And let's look at all the possibilities which are there. And I would like to invite each and every one of you to be there, fully engaged, for the simple reason that you will not find many platforms where you would get this knowledge. And I presume that every one of you have an interest, a vested interest of some kind or the other. Probably you have a child, or you're about to become a parent, or you already have been engaged in the field of education and you would like to take this forward for other reasons, or you could be a spiritual enthusiast. Any which way, today's session is going to be a beginning of a different kind. I can assure you about that. In utero reading, in utero communication, as we call it, we'll get into facets of that. And today, largely, I'm going to be covering the parts of what indeed is it. And secondly, because it's something which is not in common knowledge, the first question arises in our minds, ye ho bhi sakta hai kya? Is it really possible? Right? So that's a question which comes up in a lot of people's minds. And if it is possible, who says so? Kaun bolta hai ye? Can it actually happen? What is the evidence that it actually happens? And what's the backing for that? And then there could be questions in terms of a deeper understanding from other perspectives. But today, what we're going to focus on is these aspects. What is it? Is it possible? If it is possible, what is the evidence that it actually happens? And some operational aspects. And I hope to cover all of these in the course of the day today. And there could be many things which are known to some people, especially people who've done other programs, either in terms of communication or in terms of prenatal education or in terms of the other programs, either of the Omnio Future Academy or in other fora. So there could be some overlap, but as usual, I would like to assure you, try to keep yourself focused on this. And for the duration of the sessions, which is today, tomorrow, and the day after, don't let yourself get engaged with how does this weigh with words of so-and-so or so-and-so book which I read, which is a very normal thing. And if it does happen, just let your mind be there. Okay, let it just take in those thoughts, absorb the thoughts, and just move ahead. Okay, so let it be there. And I would like to make full use of the 2 hours I have and see how much time we can spare for questions. I can assure you that, again, if there are questions, we'll try to address them definitely at some point of time or the other. But by the end of the session, we hope that we'll be able to address all the questions and make sure that every one of them gets addressed. Okay, so that's the preamble, so to say. And with that preamble, let's begin the session. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint presentation because when you have a lot of stuff to cover, it makes sense to compress it into a standardized format so that it becomes easy to deliver as also easy for you to cognize. Okay, so I'm going to use that format and request all of you to keep your cameras on again if you would like to take these benefits right through to the top. So in utero communication happens in a particular context, right? So let's start at the very beginning. How many of you have heard the term in utero Let me please raise your hands on the screen. Let me just see how many of you have heard this term earlier. In utero. Okay. I can see, okay, from the people who are there on the screen, I can see about probably less than half of them taking their hands up. When you talk of the term in utero, we'll come to that itself. In our specific context at this point of time, we're going to be addressing the duration of the time when the child is inside the womb, as also in some ways the time after that, that is after a child is born, and the time sometimes before the child even arrives into the womb. Okay, so it could be all three dimensions. However, much of it is going to be focused around the duration in and around the womb. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on in these sessions. So those of you who have not heard this term, there's nothing to worry. You don't need to know anything. You don't need a background for this. And this is an open session. And we would just invite you to be here for and just be here both in body and mind. That's it. There's no other demand, no other ask at this point of time. That said, let's look at what journey we're going to embark upon. It's called a Gita, a Garbha Gita. The very term Gita will obviously resonate for a lot of Indians. And Larissa Ma, I know that she's more Indian than many of us. So although she's not from India, but she is very much a Bharatiya. So that said, see, the concept of Gita as something which is lyrical, which is musical, that which sounds harmonious, comes in automatically. What is it that goes along with harmony or along with music and rhythm, and how does it link up with Garbha? And as I already mentioned, Garbha itself could mean many things, including the uterus or the womb, or it could mean other things. So how do we integrate and see all of this? So we'll begin right at the top, addressing babies in utero. The first connotation we all have will always be in the context of pregnancy. Pregnancy or the duration of life which occurs in the course of the womb journey. So the duration itself and the things which go along with that have got significant connotations in many realities. Every day there is a changing paradigm in this space for people who may think that, it's all the same all the while. But let me assure you, there are many things which are changing in this field on a daily, if not on an hourly basis, because this is a very dynamic field. For instance, the very usage of the term, this looks very simplistic, but just to look at it. If you speak of pregnancy, obviously there are two things. First and foremost, people think of pregnancy as what do you think of it as? Usually a medical event, right? You will think of it as something where doctors are involved, hospital is involved, child is involved, childbirth is involved. All of that has to happen. And therefore, whom do you go to? You will typically go to a gynecologist for that. So that's where the origins seem to be misplaced, if at all, because gynecology does not deal with childbirth. It's obstetrics which deals with that. So the fact that we need to engage on a more significant, if not a serious note, with each of the terminologies which we are using comes to light from the very beginning, because this is a science of birth. This is a science of the womb. This is not of other problems or other diseases which a woman might encounter. Similarly, pregnancy is not a 9-month thing. Kitne mahine ka hai? 9 mahine ka pregnancy hota hai. This is a wrong usage of the term, because a full term of pregnancy is much more than 9 months. And if it's the 9 months plus some weeks and totaling to about 40 odd weeks, if you don't reckon the full period, the baby becomes preterm. It's not a full term baby, but a preterm baby. So changing the nuance of language itself has become one of the changing paradigms in the world today. In fact, in pre and perinatal education circles, there's a significant emphasis that please let us not orchestrate, because we do believe even in those circles that there is a certain energy transformation and energy transaction which happens with the usage of words. So there we are conscious and careful not to use the term 9 months in the context of pregnancy, but to say full term, if not at least mentally imagine the period of 10 months, so that you actually link up with a child in the context of a full term birth. Similarly, other terms have evolved. The paradigms have changed significantly. Like what? You have the reality of uh, biology, right? Biology has been one of the foundational sciences which has paved the way for a lot of knowledge to grow, and a lot of benefits which have come about from that also through biology, modern medical sciences, a whole lot of other allied sciences. We've all benefited tremendously. How? You see the infant mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, and all of those. So the rates at which people used to die or morbidities used to occur have come down significantly courtesy of these sciences. So we're very respectful towards them. So from being a mere offspring, how does an offspring, which is something which happens by rote in the whole of nature, how does it become enshrined with awareness enough to be called life? And that mass of cells converting into human life or becoming a being, a human being. And the language from being purely technical or medical, from embryo, fetus, endowed with life, how does it become a baby? And how does it become something of my own, where I can transact with that in flesh and blood, and of course, with all the emotions, with all the thoughts which I have about that child or that baby. And even in the world of pre and perinatal sciences, every time I use the term PPN, it is prenatal, perinatal. Combined together, they're put together as PPN. PPN sciences, they reckoned first that there is a silent growth period of what's happening inside the womb. The paradigm has changed significantly to bring in the context of sentience. The word mentioned there, sentience. We'll deal with that in the next few minutes. And spiritually again, from what was called as progressing through the uterus itself, how can you engage with it holistically? What is the holistic development, which includes the spiritual context, is something which we're going to consider here as well. And all the while, when we use the term spiritual here, we are not meaning, puja part or getting into chanting, meditations, nothing of that. Spirituality has a very evolved concept of a continuum of life itself, of how I, you, baby, every one of us are always engaged even in that realm. So it's the larger dimension of each and every one of us, which we mean when we speak of spirituality. It is not puja part and Bhagwan, and not to be left aside for an appropriate day after I retire, after my child comes of age, after my daughter gets married, after my grandchild gets settled. Not that. It is something which happens day in, day out in the course of everybody's life. So from those paradigms, new paradigms have emerged. The old ones have given way to the new. So what is in utero reading, or what is in utero communication? First and foremost, let me clarify. You'll keep seeing these terms coming in as in utero as two separate words, in utero as one word, and sometimes I with the capital and I without being in the lowercase. So you'll get it in all formats. Let me clarify to all of you, every time it comes in the slide, all of them mean the same. This is the entire connotation for the period when the baby is inside the womb. And the state of being an embryo or a fetus is what biologists call it. The science of biology alludes to this as the period when the child is there in that state as a fetus or an embryo. Now, this combined period, how does this measure up as in utero communication? This is where the difference comes. In utero communication is transfer of information. It is transfer of information with sounds. Sounds, and these are primary. Sight or seeing, Is this of parents? Is it of the child? Or is it of both? We'll examine these. And it also involves cognition, comprehension, understanding. So it's not just sound and sight without comprehension or understanding. So that also comes into it. So when we talk of in utero, we are talking in all these facets pertaining to the womb, the period in and around the womb journey, and also the communication which is happening constantly with sounds, with sight, and a meaning which is emerging out of it. All of this put together is what we're going to be talking of as in utero, be it communication and more focused on reading aspects. First, let's deal with what we all know on this. We all know many things about this space even without anybody saying it. We don't need a reference of some knowledge which has come from somewhere else. Intuitively, most of us will know it, and culturally, many of us will know it. In fact, in the field of education, psychology, the world of science as it is evolved, significant amount of studies have gone on this. So people might have gathered knowledge from that. And of course, from culture, from society, a lot of things would have happened in the course of our lives as well. So what is this period where that communication happens through sound, sight, and comprehension? And this period, as I mentioned, extends from or through pregnancy, infancy. Now, what is infancy and what is pregnancy? Pregnancy is the one duration when the baby is inside the womb. Infancy is after the child is born, roughly to the age of 2.5, a maximum of 3 years from the time of birth. So we are covering pregnancy, infancy, and beyond. However, keep your eyes wide open because this might be a surprise for some people. It could even take in other periods. We'll talk about it at an appropriate time. Now, if all of this is known, with this knowledge, some amount of curiosity also builds up. Agar ye sab kuch hai, so what does this mean? And the moment I begin to understand or probe this in a little more depth, what happens? Some questions come up in mind. And some of the more prominent questions will be, how does a baby get that message? How does messaging happen to a baby? Is it at all possible? Does a baby read? Or is there some other methodology? How does it operate? How does it work? All of these are things which come up. And culturally, again, some of these things which we have operated without formal science being there in our awareness, but still culturally being aware of it. Let me just ask this question. How many of you have been told that reading Mahabharata or Bhagavad Gita in the course of pregnancy is not done? Are there any ladies here who would vouch for that? Or any other culturally oriented people? Okay, there are certain cultures. Okay, there are certain cultures. There are no rights and wrongs in any one of this, but it's a fact of our society. But there is a popular segment of Indian population which believes that you should not recite Mahabharata or some specific portions of it, including the Bhagavad Gita. You should not recite that in the course of pregnancy. And there will be equal number of others who will say that, no, you should do that. It's a good thing to do. So how does this operate? You should do it or you should not do it. Both of them seem to be, seemingly opposite paradigms. Can we integrate both of them? Is there a way we can look at both of them and make sense for each other? Of course we can. Let's see how. So going ahead in this journey, let's examine some of these in a little more perspective. But behind all of this, there is always a presumption, first and foremost. If anything is possible, either in terms of being able to see, being able to hear, being able to understand, comprehend, communication, passing of information, all of that has to happen. The child must be having some abilities. And largely, we're going to be focusing on the duration the child inside the uterus, in utero reality. Dealing with in utero reality, the child Does it have abilities? This is a question which has been there in the minds of a lot of people. And it continues to be there. Notwithstanding the fact that significant amount of progress has happened in different branches of knowledge, but this question will remain. Will the child be able to grasp it? How, what is the mechanism? What is the ability of the child? Does the ability pre-exist? When does it get formed? All of these are legitimate questions. But what we need to be aware of is that this is a fact accepted in the world of education, psychology, and science today. Let's look at it. Pre and perinatal sciences, PPN sciences. What do PPN sciences tell us? The chart here. Inside the womb, as the baby grows, every day of its life, every instant, there is a new progression. Starting from the first few weeks, 6 to 8 weeks onwards, the sensorial faculties are under development. And each one of them, in a overlapping kind of a fashion, develop, and right through to the term of pregnancy, this development happens. It's an amazing matrix. You'll see that on your screen. As you will see, the sense of sight, 10 to 26 weeks. Sense of touch, the tactile, touching, that's one of the first things to develop. Within about 6 to 7 weeks, it begins to develop and goes on till the 32nd week of pregnancy. And each of these, at different points of time, these faculties are present with the child, and the child utilizes them. More than just being present, the child also utilizes them. This is fascinating knowledge from the pre and perinatal sciences. So who brought this to the fore? Amongst the people who have done human work, there are many names, but I've chosen this name because this is the gentleman, Dr. David Chamberlain, one of the pillars of pre and perinatal sciences. This paper was submitted by him, and I've taken it from this paper, which he submitted on development of fetal senses. And the assertion which was made, which is now a standard accepted fact, is that the baby inside the womb is sentient. Now, what does sentient mean? First of all, there is awareness. There is an understanding. There's an appeal, be it psychological, be it sensorial, be it emotional. Each of these faculties seem to be there. The baby seems to be grasping it and dealing with these things. All of that put together simply is called sentience. Without getting into technicality, sentience is how the aggregate of senses are going to be engaged with. Okay, so the aggregate of senses, mind, comprehension, emotions, all those faculties put together is what is called as sentience. Sense, sentient. Keep that at the back of your mind. And the baby takes in information and communicates with the world outside. Wow, look at that. How do I know that the baby has taste? If the mother consumes more of chocolate, the consumption of the amniotic fluid whilst inside the womb goes up with the sweetness. The mother consumes pungent stuff, garlic, other stuff, the consumption of the amniotic fluid comes down. So there are parameters by which these measurements are being made. What I'm trying to assure you is this science is tremendously progressed. In fact, so many facets, experiences of people after they're born, events which they have recorded, knowing how people have transacted through their lives very early inside the womb, the responses they've given, including many people of eminence, people who have learned music, being inside the womb, people who have learned different kinds of knowledge, languages, mathematics, so many things while being inside the womb. Now, this is known from pre and perinatal sciences. So the child indeed does have abilities. If the child has abilities, yeah, I'm just putting this slide up for information purposes. The evidence is overwhelming actually. But the underpinning stuff is this. If there is more communication and more attachment, more bonding, which takes place between the people who are engaging in that process of caregiving, communication, whatever kind of engagements happen between the baby and the outside, and they're aware, conscious of it, it leads to more bonding, attachment, and therefore better results. This is one. And for those of you who are interested, I'm just giving you references of some papers which are there. If any of you need this, please get in touch with Nutanji. We'll try to facilitate getting these papers across to you. Mother's attitude to baby during pregnancy. It has implications for the child's subsequent development. Mothers whose responses to infants' facial cues, meaning parents who know how to respond to the baby when it's showing a particular inclination of face, certain facial features, the cues which you can read from the face, how that influences the bonds with babies, and bonds means better communication, better development. So the kind of engagement a parent and a child can have will become much better if the parent is enabled or empowered to read the facial cues present in a baby. That shows the abilities. And then the question arises, how early does this begin? We are talking of certain periods, but indeed, how early does this begin? When do you think the baby actually has abilities to transact? Would anybody like to take a guess? Just raise your hands and I will probably unmute you. If those who are there on the screen. And I would not like the GPs to respond on this, okay? Anybody else would like to take a guess? When exactly do you think the baby gets this ability? Yes, Sudhakar ji.
Yeah, I think 3 months is what I feel. From 3 months, they usually say the baby will be able to sensorially hear, so good music will be effective. That's what at the layman level.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sudhakar ji. Anybody else? Before conception, okay, that's, I presume.
Yeah, right from before conception.
How do you know that?
I strongly believe the soul just waits to get into the womb of these particular parents. So maybe the soul chooses you, and maybe the soul will be able to communicate and get all these things.
Have we seen a soul? No, don't mind me. I'm asking this question. Have we seen a soul or felt a soul?
Not exactly.
Yeah, that puts us into a difficult. Please bear with me. The moment I say this, it could be a personal fact for you more than a belief. In fact, beliefs are facts, probably stronger facts than what are called as facts. So, but however, in the sensorial world in which we live, most people believe it may be possible, but there could be many people who say that this is a concept which doesn't exist. Okay. So we are going to take a large mass of people at this point of time for this purpose and believe that, the concept of something happening at the preconception stage, something happening at, the spirit stage, and something happening right at the time of conception. Now, these are all concepts, but we need to understand and appreciate this. And this is a science. What you're saying might be a fact, but we need to address it from a perspective of a factual, well authenticated thing before we make a public pronouncement that indeed it does happen like this. However, as a belief, it's very much valid. As knowledge, it's very much valid. However, personal it could be, it's really valid knowledge. I will leave you with that. Okay. Now here is something which I'm going to invite each one of you to partake in. Please come into my world. What is this world? One second, please. Just give me a moment. So I would like you all to watch this film. I do hope that people are able to watch this. Nutanji, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen? Yeah, okay, there you go. And here, please watch this.
How beautiful you are. Yes, good girl.
Janet Worker lays 12-hour-old Marissa into a bassinet. She places a pacifier into the newborn's mouth. The pacifier is hooked up to a computer which records the frequency and intensity of the infant's sucking. Dr. Worker and her colleague, Tracy Burns, wanted to know whether only hours after birth, the baby human would prefer her parents' native language to a foreign language she had never heard before. Marissa was born to parents who speak only English. It was the language she heard in the womb. Marissa listens to a tape with two languages, English and Tagalog, a Philippine language. The actual words are filtered out, and the languages can only be distinguished by their cadence. Tagalog is played first. When she hears this language she's never heard before, she gives a very weak response. But when she hears English, her parents' language, she reacts completely differently. The intensity and frequency of her sucking shoots up, and then when the tape switches back to Tagalog, her sucking diminishes. This reveals two amazing facts: that baby humans begin to learn the properties of language in the womb, and at birth, they prefer the rhythms of their native language to those of an unfamiliar one.
Now that's the world of science speaking for you. I hope all of you heard that and you were all able to see it. Please confirm. Yeah, good. Now, if you're able to see it and get the message from there, the message is probably loud and clear. What is it? The baby is comprehending, understanding, responding. Now, all of that as a matter of research, as a matter of objective evidence-led world, which is showing that a baby which is how many hours old? 12 hours old. 12 hours old baby is giving this kind of cognition, response, communication, as also evidence of multiple faculties being simultaneously in operation. So there seems to be something else beyond what we knew till now. Let's look at how this progresses in many dimensions. Let's continue with this narration. Okay, let me just. Okay, now I'm going to play that again. Just watch that.
In fact, from the moment the baby human comes into the world, they are equipped with this exceptional capacity. But new research shows that they know something even more extraordinary. Nelson is less than 24 hours old. During his 9 months in the womb, he heard his parents communicating in English. As in the previous experiment, the pacifier is hooked up to a computer that registers the frequency and intensity of his response. Dr. Rushen Shi's experiment is designed to see if at this early age, the baby human can distinguish between different parts of speech. Nelson listens to a tape which contains 2 lists of words. The first is a list of prepositions and articles, words that have no meaning on their own, like to, in, or it. As Nelson listens, the computer registers his level of response. The The second is a list of content words, like nouns and verbs,
Toys. Find
parts of speech that convey meaning.
toys. Chair. Find chew. Chew.
When Nelson hears the content words, his level of reaction increases dramatically.
Find. Find
This study has been repeated with babies in many different languages with the same remarkable results.
chew.
That even at birth,
Find
the baby human is able to distinguish the words that convey meaning over all other words.
toys. Chew.
Okay, I know that there'll be some people who don't get what's happening on the screen quickly enough. They're probably of my generation, but I'm going to explain it to you. It's a very simple mechanism. Newborn babies, मतलब अभी भी जो पैदा हुए बच्चे 10 घंटे 12 घंटे के बाद में उनमें कैसे response रहेगी for input signals of language. The first experiment you saw the language of Filipino, which is a foreign language, and second English, which is the native language being played. The moment the native language is played, which is English in this case, the sensations are quickly grasped by the baby and the responses being given by the baby are tremendous. How are you measuring it? The sucking and the intensity, both the frequency and intensity are being measured. It goes up dramatically. So that was one. This second experiment with a different baby, again about the same time birth, what happens? That baby is played sounds which are of two types. One are what are called as prepositions or articles, the, and, it. All of those come in the context of prepositions and articles. And another one, which is nouns and verbs, which is the stuff which we see and transact with. And the ones which were used there were toy, chew, okay, table, chair, action, moving, all of those are in that category. When you play the sounds which are nouns and verbs, which are action, real life stuff, there is a response from the baby. Compared to non-action words. How does this happen? Isn't that fascinating? Right at that tender few hour age, you can't even call it 1 day old. Within a few hours, you have a stupendous performance being orchestrated by the baby within the few hours of its birth. So even the world of science, the world of education, pre and perinatal education, is vouching for the fact that if this is indeed happening, if the baby is just 10 hours old, is this something which happened in the last 10 hours? Or was this something which happened earlier itself? That becomes a moot question. So the way science, objective science, has been progressing is also phenomenal because it's making available to you this information, this data to tell you that abilities, cognition, and look at it, very intelligent responses, very considered, measured kind of responses coming from a baby. It has talents, it has abilities. Let's see what all this means in the course of our journey. Let's look at that in some more detail. So this begins quite early, as we know. And as we see this, we can see that the baby is cognizing, making sense of languages, responds better to parents' languages. Okay, because using the term mother tongue could be slightly complicated in the context of the present day, where the father, mother could be having different languages, and the father himself could be having multiple languages. His father, that is the grandparents, could be having different languages, and what the child has picked up could be one of those. So given all that, there is an enormous complexity, but whatever language the parents speak seems to be the one which is the dearest and most actionable for the baby. And action words are the ones which are making the baby move. And within hours, the baby is discriminating, knows what is needed by it and how to respond to that. This is superb knowledge for us when we view it from the perspective of science. Now let's look at the socio-cultural perspectives. And this is something I think many of you would have already gone through. How many in the course of your experience in your lives, through the period you carried your children in your wombs, or heard of these in your neighborhood, friend, society, circles of your family? How many of you know that in utero the baby knew things and it exhibited that when it came out? And it's replete in our culture. Do any one of you have experiences of that personally with your own children? Would you like to raise your hands in case you have had? Nobody? Or maybe the next screen. Okay, I can see one, Swamiji's hand going up. Is there anybody else? Look at that. We have one male vouching for the fact that he had.
Harleen Kaur also has raised her hand, Baba.
Yeah, Harleen ji. Okay, let me. Harleen ji, would you like to share that, what you know of or what you've experienced? Yeah.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Shihovam Babaji. I couldn't believe, actually. I thought it's just a cultural practice. I thought, let me just try it out. So I actually, used to talk to my baby and used to tell him that whenever, when I was about to deliver, around 9 months. So I used to tell him that whenever mama will ask you to come out, there will be a tunnel and you will simply have to, come rushing out of it, and you don't have to think anything because mama will be waiting for you. So, and I remember on my delivery day, and when I was in the labor room, my doctor was asking me to push, and I was asking my son to mama's calling you, baby, come, it's time to come out, it's time to come out. And the doctor was in fact smiling at me, but it was unbelievable that I had a second stage labor of literally 5 to 10 minutes. And the doctor herself came out and said, he really listens to you. I must say that the child really listens to you. And this was only one such thing. And I also taught him, the concept of night and day. So I used to always, wish him good night, good morning, it's time to wake up and stuff. And to my amazement, from the day he was born, he used to sleep at night, and he used to wake up at 6 o'clock. That used to be his activity time.
Wow, that's a brilliant story. So
Shiva. I mean, I couldn't believe it myself that it works.
Shivohamma, thank you so much. Thank you. I have never been in any session, and not just this kind of a session, but any other individual or group sessions where there have not been people who've had these thrilling, fulfilling, or experiences of different kinds. So what happens in utero and the cultural practices which go along with that, there seem to be a significant amount of engagement as socio-cultural and many things which are steeped in traditions as well. So we know that this is there. If you look at anything in India, you'll know that people have had experiences like Harleen was saying. It's a story of an instruction or a communication which happens about the time of birth, and it progresses. You could have had about food, some craving which you have had translating into something which the child automatically picks up, some taste which you've had, some clothing which you might have worn, some people you might have met now, or some ads, jingles people might have seen, and reflection of those happening subsequently in the course of life. These are all facts of life. These are things anecdotally recalled. And in India, I know that a large multitude of women have experienced this, families. And if you're a little more conscious, there's probably much more to observe. But suffice to say that this is something which is given for us, actually. We don't even need sessions of in utero reading and learning in India, because if you just go back and look at what your grandmother or your mother would have said, most of the things would have been, anchored on tradition, customs, culture, and those are very, very strong sources of knowledge by themselves. Thank you. Let's look at this from the perspective. Every one of them, the shlokas which people have recited in the course of pregnancy, music which they have heard, some of the things which they have engaged as math, and some baby shower gifts which they have got. All of these have been part of what is known as innate knowledge in the Indian tradition where people know that these things have occurred in the course of our lives. Earlier, the times were such that, people would stay at home, be engaging with themselves, doing a lot of activities in the course of pregnancy, engaging with the child, moment to moment, day to day, hour to hour, games, prayers, all of that used to happen with a host of relatives, people around them. But today, reality is very different. We have to get to work. So I know people who work virtually to the last day as women. They go to work officially into their offices, factories, wherever they might be, virtually to the last day, and then deliver a baby. So times have changed, but this knowledge is innate in India. That said, it's not just India. I'm just giving you two examples of cultural in utero practices. In Korea, this practice where the mother plays music, reads stories, talks to the baby, yoga, a whole lot of things, in the understanding in that culture that this passes on to the baby. In France, something called haptonomy. What happens? Technique of massaging, where the faculty of touch is used. And with that, they communicate with the baby and they engage. This is something which is a recorded fact again. So all these are aspects which are kind of socio-cultural and educationally. If you want to look at, let me give you another set of examples. Okay, this is from the world of science again, some of them. Now in Israel, as a country, I'm told, okay, this is not objectively verified by me other than media reports and articles. I believe that there is a culture of educating the pregnant woman, taking up to math and other logic, quizzes, all sorts of things to enhance the intellect of the child. I believe it's part of strong cultural tradition within Israel that it happens with every woman who's pregnant. Be that as it may, math seems to be the most difficult, complex thing because half, or rather more than half, the children seem to be averse to mathematics. Now let's see what modern science and education says about mathematics. This is another paper. This is another scientific research. Parents' math skills rubs off to their children. And this is a first evidence which has been published in this paper. As I said, if any of you want references, we'll be very happy to share this. First evidence found of intergenerational transmission of unlearned non-verbal competence in mathematics. Okay? And second, whoever believed that what you do in the course of pregnancy can influence the learning of your baby in math and science. Indeed, it's the truth. Indeed, it's a fact today because there's this astounding study which tells you there's a concept called locus of control. What's the locus of control? If the mother believes that she is in control of things inside and outside of her, that is the pregnant mother, and she believes that she is not at the mercy of other things, or she is not a pawn in the game, but she is the one who's in the driver's seat and is able to manage things, control things, and orchestrate things, the effect of that is going to be a child who's much more competent in maths and science. How did they do this? Now, this is a longitudinal study. That's why I brought it up here. What's a longitudinal study? These are studies which are carried out with the same subjects at one point of time and subsequently measured in another point of time. The same subjects, the same children, the same babies, the same mothers come back after time. And in this case, it's a very long period of time, as you will see. Now, this is a study in University of Bristol. It's a longitudinal study. Women come back after 18, 19 years, more than that. And the research examines this locus of control and the impact it has on the mother's ability to give maths and science faculties to the child. So 1,600 of them revisited, and in 2019, they relooked and confirmed that there is a very high skew, very positive correlation between the mothers who had that locus of control and the child having better, good, high mathematical and science learning and demonstrating abilities. So here you have evidence again. So the world is proving again and again some of the things which seem to be very complex or difficult for mankind today, especially the knowledge of logic and mathematics, which seems to be a bugbear or a devil for children, many children. That seems to be something which is capable of being orchestrated by the mother into the child. This knowledge coming out through longitudinal studies. This is a huge progress for mankind. So the point is that we need to understand that through all this, abilities come from birth. You don't have to have any doubts about that. They come right from the instant of birth. And it could be the continuum of what started prenatally. So there are a host of research establishments, universities, a lot of them, some of them will deal with this in the course of the day today, because today is anchoring ourselves to the foundations. And ZTT refers to 0 to 3. So people who are working in the ZTT space, that is 0 to 3, infancy space, know that there is a continuum, and that continuum started prenatally. So this is a big movement today. And including scientists or observers, researchers like Professor James Heckman, all have come down to this period, that it's right in the beginning, and that right in the beginning can be instant of birth or preceding that. That is the common knowledge which is there today. In all of this, what is the position? What is the role of parents? Here comes yet another. Do the parents have a role in this? Well, indeed, the parents would have a role. How does that come about? I'm going to take you through this small video again. This is again a very, very commonly available knowledge in the world of pre and perinatal sciences. People know about this in that world, but because we have a mixed audience, I'm going to share this video with you and invite you to have a look at this and see for yourself.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In this still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm
Now, there are many things which you could observe from this, right? You saw the dramatic change in the baby based on what cues the mother is providing. So you have, this is a very famous, very popular experiment called still face experiment, which is there in all the literature which you'll get in the scientific world about this space. There's nothing new about this. But the understanding which we need to carry is that this is not a sudden thing which occurs in that child. There is a gradual progression which brings us to this point of engagement. And this is an ability which is being acquired by the child, again, as a continuum. It is not something which is happening overnight. It is something which needs to get orchestrated in the course of life of that child. How close we'll see. The message in this is that the parents provide the cues for the child. What's going to happen in the child's life is significantly going to get influenced by what the parents provide as cues. Now, when the mother didn't react with the child, what did the child do? At the end of it, the child threw a tantrum, cried. They will cry, they will show their unhappiness. The worst situation is when the child withdraws. If the child just becomes quiet and loses interest in things in and around it, that is a harm which has befallen many children. And that is also seen in the course of research. So how quickly a child recovers from distress has many other kinds of indicators. The kind of bonding attachment which has taken place between the child and the parent, all of those get demonstrated. So there are many, many layers of messages which you can extract from this. So it is not just that the child and parent have an interaction and a communication, but that is layered, nuanced. There are many messages which are getting exchanged between them. So the baby is very, very accomplished in all of this. Through this, we can see that the parental engagement seems to be a key of sorts. Of course, there is bonding attachment. Bonding and attachment are two terms. Again, for those who are uninitiated, for the people who are new into the world of pre and perinatal sciences or this engagement which we are having, it is the kind of engagement or the linking up which happens between the baby and the parents. That's called bonding and attachment. There are technical differences, forget the technical differences. In a very simple manner, how close, how interactive, how interlinked they become is the phenomenon of bonding and attachment. This seems to be getting influenced significantly by the actions or omissions, positive doings or non-doings of parents, all of them coming in a complete continuum. Let's have a more detailed appreciation of this. And you can see this in longitudinal studies across populations, across countries, across many studies. And because today is the day when we're going to engage in this perspective to get the facts behind this from the objective world or the objective science point of view, let's look at the role and relevance of how this influences the engagement of the parents with cognitive development and language. And this is a monumental study done by Professor Lynn Murray of the University of Reading. It's pronounced Reading. It's in UK. It's in Great Britain. Now this university and Professor Lynn Murray have done fantastic work. I just want you to get an appreciation of what work has gone on there. Be there with me, flow with me. This is the effects of engagement between parent, child. Now, how do you study this? See, in the normal course of things, you can see that parents who are actually engaged with the child, there could be different layers of engagement, right? Some parents spend more time, have know more things, have more toys, have more knowledge, can engage with the baby day in, day out, do many things in the course of the days or the day. Some parents may not have that ability. Some people might do it less, some people might do it more, and you seem to be getting mixed kind of results. For this study, they've chosen something which is typical for a study of this kind, which is what happens if there's no engagement or definite low engagement from the parent side. What is the impact on the baby? And for that reason, they picked a population of what is called as prenatally depressed women. Okay, now don't be surprised. Close to 30% of the pregnant women go through prenatal depression, and more than 30% of the women go through postnatal depression. So pre and post is a reality of life. Okay, so it expresses in various forms. If we have the awareness, if we have the knowledge, we can deal with it. But in a country like India, many of us might not even have been aware of it. But that's a fact of life. So when that happens, if you are in that situation, what happens? Your ability to engage with your baby becomes less and less. So this is a sample of mothers, of parents who have had less interaction with their babies. And what is the impact of that is something which we are going to see through this magnificent study which has been done at the University of Reading. This study of prenatally depressed mothers, PND, prenatal depression. Mothers, automatically, they're showing, as you can see in these graphs, low response of the mother to their children, and in this case, they're contrasting both girls and boys, after 2 months after birth. That is 2-month-old children after that. Look at the responses they've got. And this was a study which revealed that between them, between girls and boys of prenatally depressed mothers, boys seem to be having a lower responsiveness from prenatally depressed mothers. Now, there are a host of reasons for that. We'll not get into that. But what this chart also shows you is that if you have a control group, that is normal babies seem to be doing this. Look at the gray graph. They seem to be doing much better than the boys who had depressed mothers. So boys who didn't have depressed mothers to boys who had depressed mothers, the right two bars, gray shows you that the people who were born to women who were not prenatally depressed, that the boys born to women who were not prenatally depressed did much better. Now, this was a study, as it says, it was done in 1993. Mind you, these are all longitudinal studies. That's why I'm picking on these. 1993. The same population was studied again in 1996. What's happened to these babies after 18 months of age, 1.5 years of age? Now, then it becomes stark. Now, this is a measurement of what is called as MDI, Mental Development Index. It's the equivalent of an IQ. The IQ of children of mothers, boys of mothers who were prenatally depressed are seen in red compared to control group or the normal children who had normal mothers, normal parents. What happens there? You can see for yourself. There's a difference of more than 10 percentage points in the MDI or the Mental Development Index. The intelligence, IQ, cognition is much better where the mothers were not prenatally depressed. Meaning, if there was more engagement of the mother, it produced better results as early as 18 months age. Now, so this is 1996. Fast forward. The same, in fact, this shows the linkages. Okay, let's skip this. We'll come to, this is clearly establishing that lower interactions at 2 months has a significantly pronounced impact at 18 months. So this is a graph which proves that. But the more astounding one is this. What happens at the age 16? The same children at the age of 16 in the GCSE scores, which is the matriculation 10 standard equivalent scores. In every parameter, 7 of them, all 7 of them, children with lesser engagement scored 1 grade below in the course of their lives. So what happened at birth, 2 months, 18 months, now many years later, 16, 18 years later measured, and see what happens. This is a profound study which just tells you, you can't afford to turn a blind eye to this. We really need to be aware that the world of science is proving again and again what we intuitively knew but never acted upon. So it's time we get back into actions and do something which we need to do. And this study the same study, by the way, of University of Reading confirms another very interesting. How does this all link up to reading of books? Book reading, books in the context of the mother child. This study has confirmed something astounding and established the linkage between reading and what's happening in the course of a child's abilities and lives. Let's look at that. It proves many things, and I'll just take you through some of them. There's something called sustained attention of babies, which is the best yardstick. If you really want to know that if a child is better developed, let me use that term in a relative sense. Please, I'm going to use some of these words very carefully. If the better cognition is measured through sustained attention. What is sustained attention? If you show a toy, or if you show something curious, or show a face, the baby is able to hold attention onto that, meaning completely engaged with that, with all its senses, with faculties, sometimes reaching out, sometimes just seeing it. Whichever way, the baby is showing attention towards that object or person or situation. If that sustains for a longer period, that shows better development in the child. Okay? So what does reading do for you? It engenders sustained attention. So sustained attention, which indicate how the child will develop later on. So the cognitive development of the child later on, it leads to improved language in babies, and books therefore become a language acquisition device for the baby. And 70%, 75% of the naming, labeling. What is this? This is a pot. This is apple. Whatever we do with children while sitting with books, right? All of them are called naming, labeling. 75% of it happens through book reading or book sharing. That's a technical term they use. And it predicts literacy and language abilities in a child. And this is across social domains. Poor people, rich people, family backgrounds, etc. Everything measured across all of that. One thing is clear. If there is a book sharing, book reading, which is happening, the cognitive abilities of the child are becoming better and better. Period. That seems to be the grade. So there are some qualifiers, of course. The engagement between the parent and the child needs to be dialogic, meaning reciprocal. It should be from the parent to the child and from the child to the parent. So it cannot be just one way, because you'll get a lot of these, things which happen in the world. I'll come to that also in a moment. But let's see what happens if the child doesn't get. If the child doesn't get this kind of sustained attention, one of the markers of development of a child, language development, which happens, language is not just language, by the way. Language is a whole lot of mental faculties growing. That's a deeper science. But however, using the symbol of language, you know what's the catastrophe which can come about? The difference between a baby who hears through continuous engagement with a parent, and if it's an environment which is free flowing, which typically happens in upper classes of society, because the parents will find time for the baby compared to lower classes. There's a class comparison in another study which has been done, because the other classes, lower classes, typically, what are they? Roti kapda makan. The parents are completely engaged in sustenance, food, daily livelihood, all of that, right? So they have lesser time to actively engage with the parents. So what's the result? By the time the baby turns 3 years of age, there's a 30 million word gap. How many? 3 crore words gap between children who had that exposure from their parents, through their parents, and children who didn't have it. So it's called a catastrophe, and it truly is a catastrophe in a socialistic sense. So let's just be aware of this. This is again a very good marker just to keep at the back of our mind. So this was a study by Hart and Risley, and this early catastrophe is indicated in much of the literature in the scientific world where you can come up with this knowledge. So the point is that words, language, derivative of that, words show up in cognition, in IQ measurements, in language, and a whole lot of other things. So we need to really buck our socks up and see that the reality is not just words alone. It's the engagement, the quality of the interaction which happens between the parent and the child. Why is it the quality of, because it's a two-way communication. Remember, it's called serve and return. Many terminologies are used in the technical world. Okay, we are just coming down to how well are the parent and the child able to interact, and that seems to be the factor which is going to cause this development, and this faculty blooms where more and more attention is given. This faculty worsens if it's not given. And this is not just the spoken word, by the way, because if it was just words, and there are a lot of people who get into throwing words at babies. And I'm sure many of you have seen, babies being paraded in front of the camera, doing many things, giving names of countries or identifying things, a whole lot of all those. Please be a little cautious. Why? Because it's not one-way communication. It has to be a dialogic. There is a continuous engagement with emotions and with many other things which is going to facilitate this. If you don't do it, or just play the TV or play a cassette or play a DVD, it does not serve the purpose. Believe me, not just one or two, a huge section of the world has been fooled time and again by people who thought that this is a way in which we can sell. It has happened. And I'm just putting a couple of them in front of you so that you cognize that this is something which happens everywhere. This commercial, this baby Einstein, I don't know how many of you know of this or are aware of this. This was something which was promoted by Disney's. And finally, they paid compensation in running into millions. Okay, that's another story. The point I'm making is that everybody has tried to make a fast buck out of this. So while the science is saying it, making use of the science and trying to exploit it has also become part of the game. That's par for the course in the world we live. But be that as it may, we need to work beyond that, go beyond that, and let's see how this summarizes. So these are a couple of charts which I'm sharing. One, the effect of book sharing on infant attention. What you see here is clearly that if the baby is given book sharing, this sustained attention, involvement through book sharing, sustained attention helps babies tremendously. So this is the babies who were given that kind of input through book sharing. Their attention grew leaps and bounds compared to children who did not get it, which is the dotted line below. Along with sustained attention, language expression. Again, the babies who were given this attention, this thick white line, this is the one which grows up leaps and bounds. For children who did not get this kind of sustained attention through book sharing, there was marginal improvement, which is just the number of words that they pick up in the course of their normal life. This is just a 5% increase, whereas it's a 25%, which means 5 times the number of words are being spoken. So this is a clear indication of the metrics which is available in the world today. So the question arises again, where does it all start? How do I really begin to make a progress in this? How can I really engage with this to create a fuller or a better understanding of this? Of course, I have to go to the beginning. What is the beginning then? Does it all start at birth, the 12 hours, which we saw a baby at 12 hours showing discrimination, learning, communication, all of that? Actually, it's much deeper than that. And this is where I want you to focus your attention on. The new knowledge tells you that every step of life, the preceding step, is a precursor for what is happening or what is going to happen in the next phase of life. What happens in the course of my adult life has been influenced by what happened in my early adult life or the end of my teenage life. What happened in the course of teenage, the precursor to that was pre-teens or the end of childhood. What happens in the course of childhood was significantly influenced by what happened in the course of early childhood, a span of life between 2-3 years of age up to puberty, 10-11 years of age, which is the course of childhood. What happens in early childhood, that is preceding the age of 3, is influenced by what happens in the course of infancy, 0 to 2, 0 to 3. what happens in the course of 0 to 3 infancy is influenced by what happens in the course of pregnancy. This is a continuum of life. We need to appreciate, the more you get into science and objective studies, our mind should automatically focus towards where does this all truly begin. Just be aware that every step becomes a precursor to the next step. And there is a linearity in this, and you cannot get away from this. So every step through the entire phase of life is linked, interwoven, causing, influencing the next step. And this is very well illustrated by Professor James Heckman. I mentioned his name earlier. In fact, when let's look at what he said, okay, what he says. Now who's he, first of all? Who's James Heckman? Any of you are aware? Who are the people who are aware? Can you just raise your hands? Who's aware of Professor James Heckman? There's one, yeah, Larissa, of course, I would know that you would know. Anybody else? Okay, now, why am I taking the name of James Heckman? Because I like professors. I like Professor Lynn Murray. I like Professor James Heckman. No, not just that. No, Professor James Heckman is a Nobel laureate. So he's not just any person, any professor, but he's amongst the one of those real doyens. He's come up with an equation, and it describes what happens in the course of life when you make investments, because he's an economist by profession, and he's put up this, yes, he's an economist. He's put up these numbers for people to see, and this has become the foundation for policy making now in the world. Now he says, where should you invest money if you want returns? Because every government spends money, right? Every country, every state, every corporation spends money for health or social welfare, whatever it might be. When should you be spending money most effectively, most productively? He gives you, who's he? James Heckman, professor, a Nobel laureate. He gives you an equation which tells you that the earlier you go in life, better returns you get. That's the simple proposition. Earlier, his proposition was first that start at preschool. That is the ages of 0 to 4, 0 to 5. Then measure it against school going period, which is the ages of 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Typically about 16 in the case of United States. And beyond 16, 18 is adult life or post-school life. So he's measured in that earlier. He has revised that equation and now presented another one, which is what I'm going to show you now, which includes the prenatal period. And this is deliberate from his side, not mine. This is deliberate. What does he say? Professor Heckman, that's his picture. Look at this. What does this chart say? It's very, very interesting. Watch this. Now, this chart tells you on this side, the rate of return to human capital, which is the y-axis. And the x-axis is telling you at different periods of time, if you invest, what happens or what are the different phases? Prenatal, 0 to 3, 4, 5, schools, post-school, etc. Now, he's got a website of his own, James Heckman. You can download it from there. This is from his website, by the way. Now, if you look at it, where is the return the highest percentage rate of return? And this is per dollar invested. For every dollar you invest in prenatal programs, where you're saying left top corner of the curve, this is a rate of return where you get about $13 to $14 per dollar you invest, which means 1,300, 1,400 times the rupee or the dollar you invest is the return you get by investing in prenatal programs. By the time you come down to school age, it comes down to $3 to $4. And by the time you go beyond that, it becomes less than $1. So this is the equation which is there staring stark at our faces, telling where should public money be invested. Are you going to invest them in creating higher education centers or prenatal early education because the return is the highest. What are we talking about? Where should public policy be spending money on? Similarly, should you be looking at more asylums and more hospitals and more curation centers or prevention centers, which is what prenatal early education does for you? Where should you be throwing your dollars? So Professor Heckman is an authority, and not just him. As I mentioned to you, there are many, many people in the world today. And I'm stretching these words today because people who are coming into this fold for the first time, that is the world of knowledge of prenatal, perinatal sciences, you need to know that this is a science today. This is a world of facts, objective, evidence-based stuff, which has been put forth by the world today. So much so that you have the World Health Organization, United Nations, and others who are vouching for this in papers, presentations, and knowledge which is being shared by them. So take it for granted that this is authenticated knowledge today. So starting from that premise, let's move ahead to a holistic understanding of what all this is. We had that objective evidence-based stuff. Now we'll move into a more evidenced or nuanced evidence. This is holistic understanding from a larger perspective than what so-called objective evidence-based sciences give us. Let's look at that. What are the essentials of communication? What is reading? Is it a science or is it an art? What indeed is language? How do adults read? And how do babies learn languages or cognize? And as they grow, how do they learn languages to write? And what exactly is happening in the process of reading? Now we need to look at all of these perspectives holistically. Let's enter that world now. And I'm laying the foundation of two terms. There is a connection between a baby and a parent which is multi-dimensional. There is one which is happening in the transactional realm. What is the transactional realm? For people who want to know this in a very simplistic form, the world in which we are, right? The real world, as we say, the objective world, where I have persons, I have objects, I have life events happening. All of that is my objective world or the transactional world. Now the symbolism of this, what is the symbolism? The way you identify and engage with this world is very, very simply through two formats. In this entire engagement in the transaction world, there should be a name and there will be a form. Name is nama, form is rupa. If there is no name, there is no form, there's no real world. Okay? That's the simplest premise you can live with. The entire transactional world is one part of my life, which is dealing with name and form. But that's not the only engagement a baby can have with its parent. There is another level of engagement, which is the spiritual world. Remember what I told you, spiritual is not equal to puja part. This is the higher awareness. How does this higher awareness happen? Through a description which is known in scriptures as Satchit Ananda, which is a dimension which is much more expansive, much more elaborate, and in often terms, very controlling and conclusive for what happens in the transactional realm. So the spiritual becomes the basis on which the transactional gets created. So I'm just introducing to these two terms because we are entering the world of holistic understanding of what's happening in the course of the development and growth paradigms. So when we are looking at this from this perspective, what are the basics of language and reading? Let's just quickly codify that and deal with it. Language is an arrangement of sounds. Every language, be it French, be it English, be it Kannada, be it Tamil, be it Hindi, every one of them, what is a language? It's just an arrangement of sounds. Many sounds come together and therefore it is recognized, spoken, transacted, used as a language. So when it's put together in a structure, sounds put together in a structure or an arrangement becomes a language. Then scripts or the written language or the written script is an arrangement of shape. So you had sound, which is the basis of a language. Basis of a script or the written language, which is called script, is the shape. So you arrange things in a particular shape. It can denote a word, it can denote an alphabet, it can denote a particular formation, and you'll get this. And I'm sure we'll demystify this. However, when you talk of reading, this might be news for you. Reading involves cognition through sound and sight. Reading involves cognition through both sound and sight. So we always imagine reading is only seeing, right? No, I'm just giving you an additional input today. Just keep that at the back of your minds. Reading involves cognition through sight and sound. So therefore, what we think we know, let's get a better understanding of what we think we know. And then again, if you enter the world of science or the world of what we know, the transactional world, in the Nama Rupa world, which is all around us, schools, universities, literature, papers, etc., you'll get multiple theories. I'm just putting two in front of you. The science of reading and a rope structure for the comprehension and reading which goes. It involves words, cognition, making sense in different ways. If you get into this world, that's part of one reality which you have already seen, which is the objective evidence-based world that has already proven how things happen in a much more elaborate way than what you can learn. But however, we need to know that language, sight, script, reading, sound, all of them have been formatted into a much better awareness for human beings today. So we'll just park these theories and not get into any one of them, because we're going to deal with it from that holistic perspective, which includes the transactional and the spiritual, which is the foundation for a holistic way of knowing things. So as we know, language is an arrangement of sounds. And what are all the things which go into that? Volume, pitch, tone, intonations. All of these get into putting a structure to that arrangement of words. So that arrangement of words as language, you will see that happening very, very effectively, because it comes together through all these structuring. So there's a voice, you know that there is a pitch, there is a tone, there's a lot of things which happen there. By the way, there's a difference between tone and pitch. What's the difference between tone and pitch? Or the volume and pitch? Let me ask you. Is there a difference between volume and pitch? What does volume do and what does pitch do? Anybody? Please raise your hands. And these are important distinctions which we need to base ourselves on. Anybody? Frequency, amplitude, yes, but what frequencies get identified with which?
Girls have higher pitch sounds.
Yeah, that's girls and boys. Okay. So what does that do?
Shrillness of voice.
What does it indicate? What does the shrillness indicate? That's the point. We need to look at it a little more than what. When there is a higher pitch, that's indicative of the quantum of emotion which is there. So a higher pitch will automatically indicate a flow or a suffusion or profusion of emotions in that. And you will notice that when you're hurt, when you're angry, when a child is screaming out, children's cries are very high pitched, right? For a deliberate reason, because that's a highly drawing energy, which kind of really forces you, because emotions are the driving force of life. For those of you who want to know more about it, please join our Dakshina courses or other courses which we run. But what's the power of emotions, you'll get to understand from that perspective. when you know that they are the driving force of life, the pitch component is indicative of the play of emotions. The rational or the other part of you is when you use your volume, your tone, the tonality will start indicating those things. What do you think the child does? Does the child use pitch, or does the child deal with pitch or volume? It deals with both because it's transacting with the parents. So it knows the pitch of the parent and it knows the volume of the parents. And the very design, you know, what is called as parentese, the way parents or anybody else addresses and speaks with children, you have that typical a little bit kaisa hai, automatically your pitch is higher, right? So why is it? Because there is a connection which happens with that emotional frequency. Yes, indeed it is frequencies. So the kind of frequencies which will get generated, the tonality differs from the pitch. And this is a very important cognition and a faculty which the child has. So when we are understanding holistically, we need to recognize that the child has ability for both. This is true in so many realities for us. Let's move ahead. Now, spoken words and language cognition. What happens? Sounds are primal. As we know, sounds get organized in grammar, syntax. At the end of the day, all words will convey a message, will convey an idea, will convey something. You know, there's a transaction of information. There's a flow of information. So it's not something random and meaningless, but there is a purpose to that. And every word, if you break it down, there is a message, there's a sound, including single words or tones like crying, ah, and oh. Each one of them either could indicate a particular type of an emotion or a particular reality or an expression of an idea. Every one of them will come to you loaded with waves and frequencies, which are called words. We'll come to that in a moment. And culturally also, we know that different cultures like the Chinese or the some of these Vietnamese cultures will use that nasal tone, whereas the Arabic world has a guttural or that ha. That is more used in the Arabic world. And again, we know the way English is spoken itself, the Indian English itself will vary across geographies, and English as a language across world will vary in tone, pitch, every one of that. So spoken languages has many, many components to that. And amongst those, you get something called Sanskrit. What is Sanskrit compared to? If you look at the structure of languages and the formation of sounds, you can't match Sanskrit. And I'm just taking a moment to mention about this because Sanskrit takes you to a different world of arrangement of sounds and energies. Now remember this is important. Now, for the record, there are vowels and consonants, right? There are swara, about 16, whatever numbers are there, and about 30 odd vyanjanas. So that put together make a combination of complex of about 50. But then there is an organization. Where does the sound emanate? Is it from the throat? Is it from the palate? Is it from the tip of the tongue, which mashes with your teeth, or the usage of lips? And that feature you'll find both in words as well in vyanjanas as well as swaras. So you will have a kavarga, chavarga, tavarga, tavarga, each one produced differently. One ka right at the base of the throat. And by the time you come to papa, ba, mama, you have to use your lips. Without pouting your lips, you cannot say those words. Similarly, very much into the depth of the throat. By the time you come to E, oo is completely pouting your lips. So there's a structure to which this arrangement the arrangement of the structure has been made very, very scientifically. And what is the science there? That's the science of energies. So the highest definition of energies and an understanding of sounds and the placement to create a particular structure and an order for human communication, transaction, and life happens through this evolved paradigm, evolved science called Sanskrit. In fact, Sanskrit is not even a language. It's a structure for languages. Therefore, many languages have emerged from the core of Sanskrit. So that's the truth for us. So let's just keep that at the back of our mind, that it involves phonetics as well as knowledge of energy. This is just as an aside, but it's good information to have. Communication and language. As I mentioned earlier, in the course of engagement in the transactional world, whatever I am engaging with in the Nama, Rupa, Jagat, or the world which is around me in the waking hours, that is this world where I have to communicate with language, and there is a methodology of engaging there. There, in the course of my growth and development, I engage in the communication with language through sound first. So even as a baby or even as an illiterate person, not knowing reading, writing, I still can communicate because I use the sound mechanism. And later on, progress into scripts. Sound represents ideas, objects, events, situations. So it's a representation of ideas as opposed to being a mere aggregation of alphabets and vowels. No, it's not that. There is a certain idea or a certain objectification which is happening even in the course of our day-to-day transactional life. So in this world of ours, we have certain words which indicate things very, very clearly. So if I say something like table, all of us will know it as something which has a top, which has got 4 legs. It is a stable structure. It can be used for writing, or it can be used for eating. It could be used for many multiple purposes. So the gross definitive words like table, you know that there is a very crystallized understanding, either in terms of expression and the meaning. So the idea or the object is very, very fully crystallized. It's definitive, gross, easily understood. Now put this against another type of communication which happens with words, abstract or relative words. If I say happiness, what I say, mean, indicate, understand, everything is very different from me compared to what you will feel. And what each and every one of us will feel will be very different to the other. So these are abstract relative words. So you have definitive words and you have relative words. Now within that, how do you see words like dharma, karma? What do you do with those words like that? They seem to be even more esoteric. Yeah, probably. Beyond the esoteric, let me use a word which some of you may be familiar with. It's called entropy. How many of you are not aware of the word entropy? Can you please raise your hands? Those who do not know this term entropy. Okay, 1, 2. Okay. Now, and I suspect that many who are not on camera may not be aware of this term entropy. Entropy is of 2 types, low entropy, high entropy. There's a spectrum. What does low entropy mean? It is definite, clear, not abstract, but certain. If you go to high entropy, it's not clear. Not clear means uncertain. It could also mean it can become anything. So therefore it carries much more potential. So you realize that there is a multiple stage potential which gets increased with entropy. So higher entropy means more possibilities, more probabilities, more power, but more uncertain. Low, certain, definitive. Like table is low entropy. Happiness is higher entropy. Similarly, the highest entropy you'll find in terms like dharma and karma. You talk about it, every person will have an opinion about what dharma is, what karma is. That's the beauty of Sanskrit as a language. In fact, if any of you see the Arthakosha or other grand literature of Sanskrit, there are some Sanskrit words which have 50, 60, 70 meanings. One word. The language is so rich because it's a structure. It can give you so many things which emanate out of that. So you have the spoken language of Sanskrit, which is giving you a download in stupendous terms. So highly dynamic words will also be a part of spoken language. So what's the difference between low entropy, high entropy? Highly dynamic words will also be used in the course of human communication. So, and they'll be spoken across languages. They can have multiple meanings. And as I mentioned, in the case of Sanskrit, multiple layers of meanings. And let's decode language and script. Language is a written script. I'm covering real fundamentals, real basics, because I want to build upon this tomorrow and day after. Okay, so please bear with me. Language as written script. What does that mean? As we spoke about, it shapes pattern recognition. At the end of the day, whatever is printed or you're seeing on screen or you recognize as words, scripts, and finally resulting in written languages will all be shapes. And it starts right at the foundational stage. How do you learn language at the kindergarten level? So preschool teachers here, please correct me if I'm wrong. What do you do? What is A? How is A conceived, constructed by the teacher for the mind of the child? A slanting line to the right, a slanting line to the left, and a sleeping line in the center. So what does that become? A. So it's a representation of one line like this, one line like this, and something in between connecting the two, which is supposed to be a sleeping line. So the imagery which is being constructed in spoken language is through shapes. It's very different from what you and I have never, some of us may have thought about it, but large mass of us never really imagined that what I've actually learned is the science and expression of shapes when I'm writing or cognizing language in a written format. So that we need to keep at the base of our understanding. Script is a shape cognition. So I took the example of A, that's what it is. And how does the adult reading process operate? The adult reading process is really intricate. How does it work? You think it's Kitab le liya, I just use this and I read the newspaper in the morning. But there's a huge process which is happening there. And not process in technical terms, but in day-to-day terms, but relevant to our understanding is what I'm going to touch upon. Please just pay a little attention, because this is what each and every one of us do, but we may not be aware. And some of you may have been aware, but might have forgotten. I'm taking all the population which is there so that we all come to the same level. I'm just going to go through this process of adult reading and cognition. See what happens. First, I begin seeing through my eyes, right? So what's happening? Rays of light which bounce off from one object, be it a book, be it anything, and from there get reflected into my eyes, and the process of sight begins using my eyes. So the mechanics or the technicality of it in biology and in other sciences, we are not going to get into it. Now, the second part begins. What's happening there? I'm beginning to recognize the script there. The shapes are being cognized by my mind. You think you're reading adult reading process on the screen, but what your mind has cognized is the shape of those alphabets put together into words, into a structure of 3 words, which is giving you a particular type of a meaning. All of them are shapes conveying through script. Remember this. Then I said that reading is a sight and sound process. What's happening in your mind? There is a reiteration of that script into a sound. So that phonetics or the sound element is coming into your cognition. So adult, you're vocalizing it internally. You might not be saying it aloud, but you're vocalizing it. Reading, vocalized silently. So the entire thing gets recollected, cognized, vocalized into your being. So there's a recognition of the shape through the script and a recollection or cognition of the sound. Now behind that, more things happen. What's happening? Those words are getting linked. So there's a recall and a perception of the idea behind the sight and the sound. And how does this perception or the idea come about? Either I know what adult is, I know the meaning of it, Or if I use a complicated term like entropy, I don't know entropy. It's not there in my memory. So I'm hearing it for the first time. So it comes either from my experience, or I could be hearing it in my cognition as a new word, de novo. So linking all of this together gives me information. So what is happening in adult reading process, finally information gets processed, arranged within my complex called mind, where it's put into certain patterns or certain structures, then it becomes my understanding or awareness. So adult reading, every day you're reading the newspaper, please recognize with every word or every page you're flipping, how much is going on behind that. So all of these has to happen simultaneously together. No, simultaneously meaning one after another, it's a sequence, but a very fast sequence. So let's be respectful towards the reading process which we engage with, because this is a huge effort. And it also, along with cognitions, gets associated with memory, as we saw. So language and memory, if I have familiar ideas and concepts, as I mentioned, they come from memory, which I already know. Or it could be an unfamiliar idea or a concept. And sometimes, or in fact, most times, trying to understand what is not familiar, I will use analogy or comparison. So what did I do with entropy? High entropy, karma, happiness. Low entropy, table. I gave you a comparative scenario, so it becomes something which is cognizable for the human faculties. So this also comes from a memory. So the current information presence itself adds to past knowledge or fully new knowledge, and all of that gets assimilated. So there is a memory. In fact, all of my language, because I learned language at the age, 2, 3, I still speak it. How am I able to speak, recall words? Even that is coming from it. So language itself, I don't forget language. I have my language and I speak it because it's also part of memory. So there's an intricate linkage of what? I'm just going to take a step back. What are all the steps? Recognizing of the script, recollection of the sound, perception of the ideas, linking together, giving information, processing of that to become understanding, becoming awareness, and then getting into the reality of linking up through memories, the structure, and that becomes something which I can deal with as language. And sounds and shapes. So that was spoken language. Let's look at it when we get into scripts. Sounds and shapes are organized into languages, both put together. Sounds are different and scripts are different. We know that. Syntax, grammar, scripts, intonations, all of these go to make sounds and shapes. So therefore, we come into a paradigm when you can express pristinely in words something of the highest entropy or the highest energetic platform or the highest potencies, even through single words. And this has been a part of ancient wisdom for a long time. Om is one word, but the nuances behind the Om will be phenomenal for us. Each and every one of us know. And it's across religions. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was everything. So says the Bible. So therefore, in the Testaments, which is Christian language or every language for that matter, there's a high prominence given to words. So words are not loosely used by human beings just because you picked it up from your parents or from society, things like that. There's a structure of energy which is happening there. I'm just coming to that point where we need to recognize certain fundamental things. Please bear with me. It might take another few minutes, but let's go ahead because this is important to get the foundations. When we aggregate all of these sounds and shapes and all of that, that is when I get into the deeper aspects of this knowledge, which operates as waves, frequencies, amplitudes, and a whole range of things which create the structure of energy and the operations between human beings and within human beings. And as I said, the proof for this is the most modern sciences. You don't have to go very far. It's the modern sciences which are proving this time and again. So This entire structuring of the science of shapes, sound, patterns is now crystallized into a new branch of science which has emerged. A modern science, a most modern science called cymatics. So cymatics puts together the shapes, the science of shapes, sounds, patterns, all of them put together, and looks at the structuring of energy and how it operates transactionally in the course of our lives. And I'm just going to give you a very quick preview into how this operates. In fact, for those of you who participated in Raiva's sessions on mandalas, some of you might have had some inclination of this. I'm just going to refresh the memory of those people. And for those who are coming in for the first time, just get into it and see what this means. You know what this is? Looks like a hazy picture, right? But it's actually a beautiful picture. Now that is emerging from a new science called, a new application of science called LIDAR, L-I-D-A-R. How many of you are aware of this term, LIDAR? Anybody here? Okay. Yeah, if Goelji is not aware, nobody should be aware. He's an automobile engineer, right? So he works with Toyota. So if he doesn't know, I would be surprised, right? So what is this? Now, all of you are now aware of the phenomenon that driverless cars are coming about, right? So driverless cars. So that using cymatics and application of that science through LIDAR, look at how it's happening. Just very simply, the mechanics of a driverless car, the functions of a driver are twofold. One, you see what's outside, and second, you see the ABC pedals and steering operation, right? So ABC pedals operation is one part. Seeing the outside, you respond with your legs and your hands. That's driving. What is facilitating all of that? You have to see what is happening outside and calibrate your responses inside. How is that happening? Light shines onto different objects which are there around you and feeds back into sensors which are placed in the vehicle. The sensor reads this, intelligently puts it together, gives instructions for the ABC or the accelerator, clutch and brake to function and the steering to work so that the movement happens, left, right, stop, ahead, all of those actions happen. How is it facilitated? Through an orchestration through LIDAR, which is a technology which is telling you how waves, frequencies operate as light to create intelligence it may be, but that intelligence picks it up and does the function of driving for us. So that image which you just now saw is a LIDAR image of a car in the surroundings. So this is the image which that intelligence, that car is seeing. Frequencies, waves, energies which are operating around there. And this is the reality of how it's absorbing it. Now, if you see this, different directions, different patterns emerging, there's a sequencing of things, and some places you'll see some triangular formations, some places you'll see spiral formations, some places lines, some places crisscrosses, but what is beautifully emerging is a lovely intricate pattern. But that's definitive, that is the one which is emerging, and that's the way waves, frequencies, operation of all of this is going on. And this application is live and real. Just watch this. Now this is what's happening to the left is a car driving. What's happening to the right is the patterns, shapes, sounds, aggregation, which is creating the mass of energy into formations and patterns. So as the vehicle moves, the patterns are getting refined, 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 refined every moment to make sense, direction, speed, navigation. Every one of them is getting facilitated through that. So this is actually an area where the most modern sciences are linking up with what? With ancient wisdom. Now, this is something which we need to keep at the back of our minds. Many of the things which may be happening in the course of my life, I can get into that awareness in a very different light. But if I come back to my understanding of a holistic perspective, you remember where we started? We started with the fundamentals of what the objective world of science tells us. And we are now looking at how the same objective world of science has evolved to such an extent that there seems to be a grand fusion which is happening between different things where you're equating waves, energies, sounds, patterns, all of them coming together and creating impacts on us. All language, it's all transaction of energies. We'll be dealing with that in a lot more detail tomorrow, because that's where the core of it comes. Because today it was a very objective thing, because this is what many of us from the world of science. But here we put it together so that that foundation is there, but that is leading you into a very high entropy situation. Mark the words, high entropy situation, when you need to aggregate all of this and see what is it which is happening in that world of that baby. What is it that the parents are engaging with? How do the two fuse together? At the core of it is what? Sound, shapes, patterns, interaction of energies, creating impacts. In fact, it's not very new either. Cymatics as a science, but it's evolved into phenomenal practice today. I'm going to end this session leaving you on with this particular video. Now, this is a brilliant video of what the linkages between sound and patterns and formations. How do they come about in the course of energies transacting in different realms? Why do I say realms? It can be as solids, it can be as liquids, it can be in different formats, okay? It could be ions. So just watch this and go to sleep thereafter, because we're going to end the session with that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, we're not going to have questions today because I think it's past, yeah, it's already 9:15. We're not going to take questions today. We'll come to questions tomorrow, hopefully. Just sleep over this video, and we'll do this video after the prayer, and then come back to this video. So stay with me for the prayer and then the video.
It is a film to describe to you the effect of cymatic
Shiva.